Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our virtual wheat demo plot tour of Pratt and Stafford counties' wheat plots this year. We're glad that you're tuning in to watch the recording. You want to move to the next slide? This year, we are doing things a little bit different. We're going to be doing this virtually, so we have Erick DeWolf, Romulo Lollato, and Kelsey Anderson here to talk about 2020 wheat conditions, as well as have a wheat variety discussion for our local area. So the Pratt County wheat demo plot this year was planted by David and Jesse Blasey. We had 18 varieties that were selected, and it was planted on October 10th in 2019. The rows were 10 inches. 60 pounds of microessentials SZ was put into the furrows, along with 7 pounds of nitrogen, 24 pounds of phosphorus, 6 pounds of sulfur, and 0.6 pounds of zinc. This field was fertilized with 60 units of nitrogen via 73 pounds of NH3 on August 19th, 2019. And a application of onset fungicide was done by airplane using 5 gallons of water on April 29th.
For the Stafford plot, John Hildebrand was the cooperator on this, and we planted 17 different varieties on October 18th, 2019 on 7.5-inch rows. There was 80 pounds of nitrogen and K-mag and pellet lime put down for fertilizer. Was top dressed with dry 30 pounds of nitrogen and 20 pounds of sulfur, and a fungicide was aerial applied yesterday, 5/28, along with 10 additional pounds of nitrogen and 2 additional pounds of sulfur.
So here's a diagram of the Pratt County wheat demonstration plot. It is 3.5 miles west of Kinchlows on Northeast 20th Street. So here is a layout of the varieties. We've got a good blend of LCS, Syngenta, and Westbred, along with a couple of university varieties.
The Stafford County plot is a half-mile north of Stafford. Again, like the Pratt County plot, we have a different variety of LCS, Westbred, Syngentas, and then some university varieties as well.
Okay, well, I think we can switch gears then and start talking maybe about some of these varieties here. And but very briefly, before we go into the Bob Dole there, maybe we can just give an overview there to whoever is watching here of what are some of the conditions that we're seeing around the state as far as the planted wheat crop goes. And so it really kind of starts back last fall, right? And with the planting conditions back then. And while several parts of the state were actually in pretty good shape, like central, perhaps north central Kansas were okay for that wheat establishment. Whenever we look at southwest Kansas, and by that I mean west, like Liberal and west from there, they were under some very severe drought conditions. And many times the crop out there didn't really emerge up to January or so. So that was the first challenge that the crop had during the season. Then the second one was that these drought conditions in many parts of the state, they extended through the spring as well. Southwest Kansas being one of these parts, but north central Kansas being another. So that region of Smith County, Osborne County, Phillips County, Rooks. So that region was actually going through a pretty severe drought stress there from about January through late May there. And that combined with a freeze event that we had sometime early April, it kind of really took the toll on the crop in that part of the state. So north central Kansas kind of had a lot of tiller loss, especially in fields that were planted late after like a summer crop, for example. Those crops, many times they actually felt that freeze damage much worse than crops that were planted earlier and had a little bit more tillers and were able to to weather that freeze event better, just because of the amount of feeders that they had out there. Now, if we think of central Kansas, south central Kansas, including that part of the state where Pratt County is, and even into Stafford County, and really down southwest to about Meade or so, the conditions have been relatively favorable this season. And I guess you see in this picture here from the plots looking awesome there in Pratt County. And so very good moisture conditions, and the crop was actually probably the better yield potential that we have in the state this year is there in that south central part of the state. I didn't talk anything about wheat because we have, about wheat diseases, because we have Erick DeWolf and Kelsey Anderson here. And maybe Erick, Kelsey, could you guys give a brief overview of what we're seeing as far as disease goes around the state?
Sure. On the stripe rust side of things, we've definitely had some activity around the state. We know that Pratt County fairly early, late April and fairly early in May was in fact picking up some low levels of stripe rust. It sounds like the disease was fairly patchy throughout south central Kansas. There's some areas of the state where it seems like the disease has gotten quite severe. Other areas, that's even though the disease has been present, the disease just hasn't progressed as quickly as we might expect. As we're looking at some warmer temperatures in the 10-day forecast here, it's a little unclear whether the stripe rust will ever be much of a threat for those fields where it's still at very low levels. Remember, stripe rust likes cool and wet growing conditions. The very same things that favor our yield potential favor the development of stripe rust. The recent cool, wet weather that we've come through has been quite conducive for some areas. The hot weather that's forecast for the next 10 days or so may downregulate some of that stripe rust, and we may not see it progress nearly as bad as we have in some other years. Also, on the stripe rust side of things, we've been seeing some changes in some of these rust populations. It seems like some of the varieties that have previously been thought to be resistant, things like SY Monument or Zenda, Larry, Bob Dole, and some others, are showing more vulnerability than what we're maybe historically seen in them. So as we go through these different varieties, we're going to try and highlight some of those that we're maybe seeing increasing vulnerability, but also try and highlight some of the varieties that still have fairly good genetic resistance available for your use. Kelsey, are there other diseases that have been on the move this year that people should be aware of?
Yeah, well, I think you're totally right there. Stripe rust is the big story in terms of number of fields that have had some level of infection, even though it's patchy, and maybe that infection didn't take off in each individual field. We've definitely had a lot of reports. Other than stripe rust, we have had some reports of leaf rust coming in a little later in the season, and now that it's getting a little warmer, that's more favorable for leaf rust. So those have just been some scattered reports, but it's something to pay attention to, especially in our susceptible varieties. Other than the rusts, we had some reports of some of the leaf spotting diseases like tan spot and septoria, particularly in central and south central Kansas. I think some of that freeze knocked that back a little bit, but because we've had some cooler, wetter conditions in that canopy when it gets nice and wet, that's perfect for those spores to splash up onto the upper leaves. So in scattered areas, we are seeing some tan spot and some septoria infection getting up into the upper leaves. One of the big things we're concerned about right now is Fusarium head blight or head scab. We've had in some parts of the state, especially southeast Kansas, we had very favorable conditions. And remember, for head scab, that window a couple weeks right before flowering is most important for disease development. So rainfall during that period and mild conditions can really favor Fusarium head blight. And we've already started to have some reports of head scab in southeast Kansas. So we're going to have to keep an eye out, especially in susceptible varieties, and make sure we're doing some scouting for those blighted heads. One thing about head scab is that a fungicide application right at the beginning of flowering is typically best, and that can even be an application of onset, like you applied to some of these plots. So So that's that tipiconazole can work really well, and some other triazole fungicides are pretty effective against head scab. So those are some things to just keep an eye out for, I think, in terms of disease. And was there anything else, Eric, that I missed?
No, I don't think so. I think we've pretty well covered it, and we can get into our varieties. Great job.
Okay, so I guess the first variety that we have here in the lineup is Bob Dole. And Bob Dole is a variety that I think we need to be keeping an eye on, and probably have it on the short list, right? And there are several things that I like about Bob Dole. So, for example, if you look at maturity, Bob Dole is going to be on that medium early side of maturity, and that can help, especially whenever we have years that turns out to be pretty hot during grain field. Those medium early or early varieties, they might escape some of that heat stress late on the growing season. It has pretty good acid soil tolerance. It has a pretty good straw strength. Now, it is very tall, right? So we need to keep that in mind. It's a very tall variety, considerably taller than many of the other ones around it. And so it can lean, and if you go too heavy on the nitrogen, or you have too excellent growing conditions, it might lean on you there, and that might be one of the concern perhaps with Bob Dole there. But Bob Dole also has an excellent quality, and so it would allow, for example, if you have access to those niche markets where you can capitalize not only on the yield but also the quality, Bob Dole is definitely one to have on the short list. Performance-wise, it has been in the top of the trials of K-State in South Central Kansas last year and a couple years in a row, and even looking 3 years back, had a very, very strong performance as well. What about the disease on Bob Dole there, Eric? What would you say?
Yeah, Bob Dole has been an interesting variety to watch. I think it still has a number of strengths here. It's still got a good resistance to leaf rust, as I understand it. And then also, Fusarium head blight, it's better than many varieties, kind of in that intermediate category. So that can be a plus. Maybe one thing to keep an eye on here is that Bob Dole can get dinged pretty bad by barley yellow dwarf, so maybe not the variety we want to plant super early, where we can get lots of aphid populations in the fall. And then also, I feel like we've been seeing a little bit more stripe rust on Bob Dole than historically we had. So I think in the future years, I think we're going to want to keep an eye and scout Bob Dole pretty hard and make sure we don't get any surprises from stripe rust.
Okay, Amanda, would you like to go for the next one there, please? Okay, so Everest, I think Everest needs no introduction for the growers in Pratt and Stafford County there. Released in 2009 from K-State, has been the most widely planted wheat for several years around the state of Kansas there. Several reasons from an agronomic perspective of why Everest was so successful. It is a short wheat with a very good straw strength that allowed growers to push it a little bit more as far as whenever looking for a little bit higher yields there because of that standability. Very good acid soil tolerance on Everest as well. That early maturity, even earlier than what we have in Bob Dole, really helps it kind of escape from the heat there. And many of the other strengths that it has really relate to its disease package. Just one comment that I would have is that probably coming up soon here, we have the variety Zenda, which is a replacement for Everest. And the reason I'm bringing it up here is because in our trials, at least in the south central part of the state, Zenda has been out yielding Everest in 3, 4, 5 bushels per acre pretty consistently there. And so, although Everest might still be in your short list, depending there if you're willing to spray a further fungicide, you probably already have the new genetics on Zenda that might be more interesting. But Kelsey, what do you think as far as what are some of the things that made Everest successful over the years from its disease package?
Yeah, well, I think you're right there. I think Everest is one of the best in the class for Fusarium head blight, and of course so is Zenda, but that's one of the things that has made this a really great option for this area. And also great powdery mildew, so that's one that can creep up and cause some yield damage. I would say one of the major vulnerabilities, and probably this year it would have been a problem, is stripe rust. So we really see this as pretty susceptible to stripe rust. So a fungicide application is probably necessary when stripe rust is bad. So overall, a mixed bag on the disease package with that high susceptibility to stripe rust. Unless there's other comments, we can probably move on.
Okay, yeah, well, double stop CL plus. Now this brings a little bit different genetics here. So this is an Oklahoma State variety released actually, I think it was 2013. So it's been around for a few years. And actually it has gained many, many acres in South Central Kansas for a few different reasons. One of them because it is a very good variety. I think it has a strong yield record, regardless of that CL plus that it has on the name or not. It does have a pretty good and pretty strong yield record there. But that CL plus, that tells us that it is a clear field variety. So that means that it is resistance to the Beyond herbicide, which is a ALS inhibitor herbicide, which gets a pretty broad spectrum of grasses and broadleaf weeds as well. So if you're in a situation where you need to control weeds, of course, crop rotation is your management number one. But if you're in a weed system that you need to control weeds, especially grassy weeds, this Clearfield technology is a pretty good one. And we also have coaxium that I think we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But as far as the variety goes, double stop here, it has a pretty wide adaptation, very good yield record in South Central Kansas, excellent acid soil tolerance, probably one of the best acid soil tolerance around, good coleoptile length as well. So just an overall a very good variety there, with the caveat that it is a medium late maturity. So again, I mean, it can, whenever we're talking about these medium late maturities, they can get caught on the heat every now and then. Pretty good quality as well. Eric, maybe you have a few comments there on what we're seeing on the disease package on double stop.
Yeah, double stop is kind of an interesting variety here. It seems like we've seen a couple iterations of double stop, and what I mean being a certified seed only variety, breeders down in Oklahoma have had a chance to do a little bit of reselection there, and then because it's certified seed only, they have a little tighter control over the release of that seed. So initially double stop was a little mixed on some traits. Sometimes we saw some variable height and some variability in its disease reaction, where you'd have a very resistant plant right next to a fully susceptible one. We kind of ended up with some intermediate reactions on some of the diseases, particularly stripe rust. But it seems like they've made some reselections now that have allowed, seem to really improve double stop. And double stop was also interesting, is it seems like it has a little higher susceptibility to stripe rust, leaf rust early in the season, but as an adult plant, it seems like the fungus dries up and is not able to reproduce very effectively anymore. Across the board, pretty decent variety. I think maybe watch a fusarium head blight on it, but overall, I'm pretty pleased with double stop. I think that strengths of its disease package has been a key to its success in South Central Kansas.
Okay, coming up here we have Larry. Larry is a relatively new K-State release there. It's been around for, I believe, 3 years now. So it was released in the same time when K-State released Zenda as well. Both varieties could be good fit there for that Pratt and Stafford County region. Larry being a little bit more adapted as we go west, and Zenda perhaps being a little bit more adapted as we go east. So Larry has some overlay and Car 92 on the background there. It has a pretty good standability, very good straw strength. So it's another one that you can actually push yields a little bit more on Larry there because of its standability. It has a decent level of drought tolerance as well. Pretty high tillering ability, so many times growers like it after soybeans because it still, although planted a little bit later, it still tillers out and it still yields quite well in those conditions. Now, if we look simply at the K-State yield records for South Central Kansas in the last year, 2 years, or even 3 years, it has not consistently yielded towards the top. And the reason I'm bringing this up is many times because I think it has to do with its disease package. Again, this is a variety that needs to be managed probably a little bit more intensively. And Kelsey maybe can expand there on why we might need a fungicide here if we want to yield out of Larry.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems with Larry is it's susceptible to leaf rust. So being a later variety, that might catch up a little bit with it at the end of the season and take some of that yield. So it's one that you should consider managing a little bit more intensively. It's also susceptible to some of that septoria leaf blotch complex, so some of those leaf spots might catch up, and also fusarium head blight. It's a little better than average for stripe rust, so that's promising. That's one of the good things about Larry's disease package, but overall a little bit more susceptible.
Okay, we have Langin here. I think you can see from this photo, Langin, it's very interesting because its heads, they seem to go all over the place. So it's not like a very straight up head type as we see in some other varieties. It just kind of goes all over the place there. That's very interesting from just a visual perspective there. But Langin is a Colorado State variety. It's probably a little bit too far off from where I like to see Langin because of its background, right? It has Hatcher and Bird on its background here. So it really is more of a Western Kansas variety and an Eastern Colorado variety. With that said, I mean, perhaps Western Stafford County, it might ever now and then have a fit, but again, year after year, I think it's a better option as we go to Southwest Kansas and even Northwest Kansas for that matter. It's a medium early maturing variety, very good drought tolerance. It has tolerance to the wheat kernel mite, good milling and baking as well. But I think it's just we're a little far east for where I like to see Langin being used more often. Eric, would you agree with that? Eric, we can't hear you. I don't know if you're probably muted.
Yeah, my internet connection looks like it was unstable there for a moment. Sorry about that. Yeah, Langdon is kind of an interesting variety of the Colorado varieties. It's been a little more resistant than, say, Bird or Avery has been, which are very vulnerable. Langdon's have been a little better, and it seems like we've kind of had some mixed results. It's kind of been either intermediate or moderately resistant to stripe rust this year, maybe a little bit more vulnerability to leaf rust. Kind of interesting that wheat chromite resistance brings some resistance to, or the wheat streak mosaic tends to spread a little more slowly in varieties like Langdon than it would maybe in some others. So can be a useful characteristic. But again, probably not all that well adapted for this area of the state, and there's probably others in the lineup that would be a better fit.
Excellent. Now, the next one coming up here is Zenda, and we already talked a little bit about Zenda when we were talking about Everest. Remember that Zenda by pedigree is probably about 50% Everest there, so it is derived from that variety that was very successful for many years around Kansas. What can we expect on Zenda here? It's going to be a few days later than what we had in Everest, but it's still a medium early maturing variety. It's also going to be a little bit taller than what we have in Everest, but still a medium to medium short there height as far as height goes here in Zenda. It is a little bit taller than Everest, but it has an excellent straw strength. And we have several trials where we have intensive management, and we're really pushing the fertility. And Zenda has stand up really well on those conditions. Good on acid soil tolerance here as well, so that's a pro for Zenda. It is a step up in quality from what Everest used to be. Remember that we were quite criticized from the quality side on Everest there, so Zenda is a step up there. Resistance to soil boil mosaic virus as well, and maybe Kelsey, you could give an overview on the disease package in Zenda for us.
Yeah, thanks. I think Zenda definitely is what you want to see in a disease package, especially if you're a plant pathologist. So it's pretty solid across the board for most major diseases, best in class again for fusarium head blight. You probably won't get a variety much better than that. Still a little bit susceptible, but probably yield pretty well even in those bad fusarium head blight years or when you're planting it after corn. So that's what we want to see. So pretty resistant to leaf rust. So that's another piece of good news. And we're seeing it hold up pretty well to stripe rust, even with these new populations. I was just looking at it in the USDA striped breast nursery, and it was performing pretty well for striped breast. So again, it's a solid disease package, this variety.
Okay, we have another Colorado State variety here, Whistler. I'm going to spend very little time on this one because I think we're out of its area of adaptation. I spend a little bit more time on Landing because maybe in Western Stafford County it might fit, but Whistler, it really is more of a Western variety. It's got snow mass on its background, it's got bird on its background as well. It is quite tall and it is quite late, and so I think for South Central Kansas, we're probably quite far off from its area of adaptation. Now, we will see some of these varieties yield well eventually, every now and then. You know, if we have a dry year like we had in 2018, we had Whistler in a trial in Great Bend, and it did really well. Now, that was an exception, right? We don't expect that variety to yield every year just because of some of its characteristics. So, Amanda, I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on this one. Very well, LCS Chrome here. Chrome has been around for a few years. It has some things that I particularly like about it, and those include especially straw strength. Nobody really likes to harvest wheat out of the ground, and Chrome really brings a very good straw strength to the table here. It is also very good. It has a very decent drought tolerance, so it allows it to go and expand out west real well, but also holding on acid soil well as well. And so it comes to Central Kansas with a pretty wide adaptability here. My concern with Chrome for South Central Kansas would be its maturity, right? It is on that medium late side. It is a fuller cycle type of variety. And with that, it can get caught on the heat whenever we have the summer that comes in just a little bit earlier, summer temperatures, I should say. It can really get caught up on the heat. It has a pretty good protein content, so very good quality there. But again, it is a little bit on the late side. With that said, the performance has been pretty good. So performance of Chrome has actually been pretty decent in South Central Kansas. If we look at it several years in a row, it has been there, except 2017 wasn't much of a Chrome year, but 2018 and 2019 were actually Chrome yielded pretty well. So spread your risk. Don't put all of the eggs in one basket. But if you're looking for a late maturing wheat, Chrome might be one good option there. Eric, what do you think of Chrome's disease package?
Yeah, Chrome, I think, has an overall pretty good disease package. Still been pretty good on leaf rust and a lot of leaf spotting diseases. The tan spot and septoria seem to pretty much leave Chrome alone. I have been seeing a little bit more stripe rust on Chrome than maybe we have in years gone by. So I think that's one we're going to need to watch in years going forward. Maybe where I differ a little bit from the Lima grain folks is I tend to feel like LCS Chrome's a little more susceptible to barley yellow dwarf and Fusarium head blight than they do. But I think other than those vulnerabilities, I think this would be one, particularly in that later maturity class, something to consider.
LCS Fusion AX. So on this one, I'm going to spend some time just on the AX side of it, regardless of which variety we're talking about. So remember, we talked about the CL clear field, allowing you to spray a beyond herbicide. Now the AX, it's a coaxium technology, which allows you to spray aggressor herbicide, which is a ACCA's inhibitor type of herbicide. So a different mode of action there. You cannot cross pass. You cannot spray beyond on a coaxium variety. You're going to burn it back, or you're going to kill it. So this coaxium really brings a new technology for you to try and control those grassy weeds. Now, different from the beyond, the aggressor, it is a grassy weeds only. It's not a broad spectrum. It's not going to get any broadleafs. It's just a grassy weeds. But it offers a good option for rotation of herbicides in these situations in which we might have a heavy grassy weeds infestation there. Okay, with that said, talking about the variety itself, again, I'm going to keep short on this one. This was the first coaxium come out to the market, LCS Fusion AX. It does have a Colorado background, despite being from Lima grain. And so probably not the best fit there for South Central Kansas. With that said, there are other options that Lima grain, even within the Lima grain, they are putting as more adapted to Central and South Central Kansas. One of them being LCS Atomic AX. So that's more of a South Central Kansas, Southwest Kansas, and into North Central Oklahoma. And LCS Helix AX as a more broad adaptability. So very worth discussing the technology here. Probably the variety is a little bit far off from its area of adaptation. Okay, we have another Lima grain here, LCS Link. So Link, we had the chance to see it now for, I think it was a couple of years. It has done quite well in the trials in the north central part of the state and even northwest part of Kansas. It might actually be a pretty good fit out there. Now, Link has a Nebraska background, right? So it's a collaboration between Lima Grain and University of Nebraska. So it has this Nebraska background, bringing a pretty good winter hardiness. It has a pretty good straw strength as well, a good milling and baking characteristics there. But really, the adaptation for Link is going to be probably I-70 and north. So there in Pratt and Stafford County, it's probably too far south for Link. It's already one of the latest maturing varieties when we go north of I-70 there. And so when you bring it down, it might be even later there. So I don't know, Eric, if you want to comment anything on the disease package of Link. Just think we might be a little bit too far south for where I'd like to see.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's probably not a great fit for South Central Kansas just because of its maturity. It has done really well in the North Central, Northwest, however. So probably on the disease side, probably the major thing that I would say is more of an intermediate, moderately susceptible reaction to stripe rust. If you did decide to go for this variety in that later maturity group, I would keep an eye on that stripe rust. So other than that, pretty good on many of the other diseases. Sometimes these later maturing varieties can look pretty good on Fusarium head blight, but just because they are maturing a little later and we don't often see the symptoms there. So I think Lima grain is saying maybe moderately resistant on the head scab, but I'd want to dig into the data and the specific reports from breeding nurseries before we really make a declaration there.
LCS Valiant, this is another collaboration between Lima Grain and UNL. So again, it brings that Nebraska background to it, bringing again that very good winter hardness with it as well. It seems to have a pretty good drought tolerance and a good yield potential there. But again, this is the first year that we're actually taking a closer look at Valiant. Seems like Lima Grain has been pretty excited with this one as far as its yield potential, its yield stability as well. It seems to be more of a medium to medium early maturing when we compare to Link, especially. So I think the hope for this one is to go south further than what Link would. So remember, Link, we're talking about I-70 and north, and Lima Grain is suggesting that Valiant is going to have a wider adaptability, and it will go south into the southern border of Kansas, perhaps quite well. And it is looking quite good. Even in this photo here, it actually has an excellent head count there, and it seems like it has very good yield potential. But I think we need to look into it a little bit more. Maybe one concern there for Pratt and Stafford County regions with Valiant would be acid soils. So if you have low soil pH, you probably have better options than Valiant, specifically for those pieces of land with the low soil pH. Any comments there, guys, on the disease reaction for Valiant, or is it still too new?
Yeah, it's pretty new. I think from what we've seen, at least a little bit, it's pretty intermediate or pretty average for leaf rust and stripe rust. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's susceptible, very susceptible to powdery mildew. So that's just one red flag to watch out for with this particular variety, especially if it gets nice and cool and wet in that canopy.
LCS Yeti. Well, I have not seen this one very often. It is a white wheat out of the Lima Grain program. So my understanding of Yeti is that this is another one with more of a Western adaptability. So Western Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Eastern Colorado as well. If you're looking into an option for white wheats out there, I believe it has a pretty decent milling and baking quality. So if you're into a white wheat program, that you can perhaps get some premium or niche market out of that to harvest it not only for grain but for quality as well. This might be one to be taking a look at. I think it had a little bit better pre-harvest sprouting tolerance, but I don't know how far east it's going to move. I don't remember on top of my head what's the soil-borne mosaic virus status on this one, or acid soils. Eric, have you seen Yeti much?
No, I haven't really had a lot of looks at Yeti yet either. I guess from what I've seen of some of the results from some of our USDA screening nurseries, it does look like it has a fair degree of susceptibility to stripe rust, but I would tend to agree with Romulo. I think this one's probably just a long way from home here, and there may be some other white wheats that we might consider that are, if we're going to look at that for this portion of the state, that are emerging, some brand new varieties that might be a consideration.
SY Achieve CL2, again, that CL2 bringing it another 2 gene clear field here to the table. So SY Achieve CL2 has been around now for, I think it's the 3rd year that we have the chance to take a look at it in our K-State trials. Syngenta puts SY Achieve as more of a south central Kansas and into north central and eastern, right? Oklahoma and Kansas there. One of the advantages of SY Achieve as compared to other clear field varieties is maturity. So SY Achieve is going to be on that medium early to early side of maturity, whereas the majority of the other clear field varieties, they will be on that medium late side. So that's the one thing that Achieve brings differently to the table there. Now, if we look at the yield record of Achieve, and so let's say that we look at the last 3 years or so in South Central Kansas, or the last 2 years, it has consistently been kind of that below average. And so it just has not convinced me that it's going to be a good option just because of the yield record. I like the early maturity on it. I think it could be a fit, but really yield record is not being there. So for that region, I was still looking into something like probably double stop or something along those lines to as a good option on the clear field variety if you need that technology, remembering that this is certified seed only. Kelsey or Eric, any comments there on the disease side on Achieve?
Yeah, I think you're right. Double stop seems like it has a better disease package too when we just compare disease packages of these two varieties. There's some susceptibility to particularly tan spot and some of these other leaf spotting diseases, and it's just intermediate for leaf rust and stripe rust. So just right in the average, not as good as double stop. So just something to keep in mind. It might be one of those more intensively managed fungicide applications that we're thinking of when we think of SY Achieve.
Okay, SY Benefit. So these varieties, another one that Syngenta is kind of positioning it to, actually this one will be more of an eastern variety. Syngenta positions this one kind of like I-35 and east. And so that kind of gives you an idea there of where it would be a better fit, right, for SY Benefit. It is an early to medium early maturity variety, has a decent amount of soil pH tolerance, low soil pH tolerance. It has soil-borne mosaic virus, so it allows it to go and thrive on that region. I believe some level of head scab as well. But this one, again, is another one that if we look at K-State yield records, it has not just been shining, right? It has been there towards the bottom the last 2 years, the last 3 years. And if we just look at last year itself, it was there on average with the trials. And 2 and 3 years altogether, it has been below average there. So again, Pratt and Stafford might be pushing a little bit far west. And even just looking at our data from South Central, it has not done too well there. But Kelsey, what do you think of the head scab on Benefit here?
Yeah, so I think it might be a little better than some others, so a little better than average for head scab. I think the big red flag would be leaf rust. It would be quite susceptible to leaf rust, and also intermediate for stripe rust, and we're seeing some maybe higher infections in the nurseries. So I think that those would be the watch outs. Definitely a red flag when it comes to leaf rust for SY benefit.
Okay, SY Greek. So SY Greek, I had a chance to take a look at it as well for a few years now. If you have worked with that variety post rock in the past, Greek has post rock on the background, and so we can kind of expect several things there, or a few of the things similar to what we had in post rock at least. Some of them are that medium to medium early maturity. It's a medium height variety. Sometimes I've seen it look a little bit tall, although in this photo it seems shorter than the ones to both of the sides there. Similar to post rock, it has a very good straw strength, so standability is excellent here in Greek. It does have a good drought tolerance as well, so those two things are positive for Greek. Maturity wise, I mentioned it's going to be more of that medium early, but it is photo period sensitive, and so it's day length sensitive, depending on the it's not only going to depend on temperature, but also on day length. So some years it's going to look a little bit more towards the medium early, other years might look more towards the medium late, really depending on temperatures and the length of the day. Biggest concern with Greek as we go to Pratt and Stafford again is soil pH. Areas towards the eastern side of those counties where you might have some low pH issues, we definitely have better options because Greek, it does not handle low pH well. Eric, what about disease on Greek? What have you noticed?
Yeah, so SY grit over the years has not proven very well on diseases. So across the board, it's intermediate or moderately susceptible to almost everything that we test grit against. So it does have some soil-borne spindle streak, some of those soil-borne viruses, resistance there, of course, for a variety in central Kansas, but a lot of vulnerabilities onto the leaf diseases. So if you are going to try SY grit, I would plan on budgeting a fungicide to go along with it.
SY Legend. So actually, SY Legend, it will be another clear field variety as well. So it's SY Legend CL2. So if you guys have worked with the AP variety, AP 503 CL2, which actually was a clear field variety that had many acres throughout central Kansas and going into western Kansas, SY Legend kind of comes as a replacement to that. And so and it has AP 503 sibling on the background there, but it does have a better disease package than what we had in AP 503 CL2. Now, I have not seen these too many times. I think some of the notes that I have is that it might be kind of that intermediate to soil pH, to acid soils, but decent drought tolerance. That's some of the comments that I had marked down. But again, I have not seen much of SY Legend CL2. Eric, have you seen much of it? Do you have any comments on the disease package of this one?
Yeah, I don't have nearly as much experience with this one as maybe some other varieties. Might be something to keep an eye on here. It looks like Syngenta's reporting that it's at least moderately resistant to stripe rust and leaf rust, but I don't know that we've had too many looks at it just yet to verify. So let's keep an eye on this one and see how well it does.
Okay, SY Monument. SY Monument has been the most widely wheat planted in Kansas for a couple of years in a row now. And there are several reasons for that. I think overall it's a strong variety. It's a variety with a very large footprint, so the adaptability or the adaptability to these different environments is actually pretty good in Monument. So it goes from central Kansas all the way to west central and western Kansas, and it looks quite well. That's partially due to a very decent drought tolerance that we have in Monument. Also partially due here because of a good acid soil tolerance and soil-borne mosaic tolerance as well as we come to the eastern part of the state. So overall, a widely adapted variety with a very good yield record. Very high tillering ability on Monument here, so it has gained a lot of acres, especially if we're going after soybeans in the north central part of the state. As growers are planting late, Monument still has the ability to tiller quite well and perform well in those late planted systems after soybeans. Maturity wise, is going to be on that medium late side. Just keep that in mind. It's not as late as Chrome, but you want to spread your risk and spread your harvest capacity as well, right? If you want to go to a variety like the Sand Dust, so you can start earlier and finish with Monument, that can allow you to spread out your harvest capacity. So one to keep on the short list for that late maturing group. Kelsey, do we need to be looking a little bit closely now, Monument, as far as disease goes, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Monument in general has a pretty good disease package, so it's very promising. It's nice to see a variety that has good leaf rust, stripe rust, and also tan spot and septoria. So although I'm looking at these leaves now in these plots, and maybe we see some leaf spots there, but it's a little hard to tell. So that's something to keep an eye on. But generally, it's got a good package. The only thing to watch out for is Fusarium head blight. So Syngenta admits that it's susceptible to Fusarium head blight, and Kansas State has found that in some of its testing as well. So that's one to look out for. This is one that, in discussions with Eric too, we've classically seen pretty good stripe rust resistance, like I mentioned, but it might be slipping a little bit. So like Eric mentioned in the introduction, some of our populations might be changing, so they might be able to overcome this level of resistance that Monument has. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as we think about this variety.
Okay, SY Rugged, it's another one that's been around for a little bit here, a few years at least in the region. And with Rugged here, it had a background of Greer and Dons. If you remember that variety Dons, it used to have a pretty good test weight, and so that's one of the calling cards on Rugged as well, is its test weight. Pretty decent drought tolerance on Rugged, medium early maturity there. Typically the area of adaptation is on that I-35 and west, right? It's not going to go east of there very well, and particularly I think that the southwest, as we go southwest, might be a better fit for Rugged. In the south central part of the state, we look at the yield record, and again, it's right there together with Benefit and Achieve, kind of towards that late side, the low end of the yield record there. So again, perhaps as we go Stafford County and Southwest, the drought tolerance can give it an advantage there. But I think the yield record has not been stellar on these ones, so maybe we have a few better options there. Eric, would you agree? I mean, what were your thoughts there as far as disease goes?
I'm also concerned about the performance we've seen out of Rugged on the disease side. It's not very good. So it does have some resistance to stripe rust, intermediate to leaf rust. And then across the board, it looks like it's moderately susceptible to a lot of the leaf spots and Fusarium head blight and barley yellow dwarf. So, that degree of number of vulnerabilities may play a role in why we've not seen Rugged perform as well as it may have during its testing and development. So I think this is probably one within the Syngenta lineup. There's probably better things for you to consider.
Okay, SY Wolverine, this is actually a brand new one here. I think we got to see it first time last year, I believe, as an experimental still. So it's a brand new release out of Syngenta there. Background on Wolverine, it has Everest, it has Wolf as well. And so those are two very different varieties, right? Wolf more of a Nebraska into the Dakotas type of variety, and Everest more of a south central, southeast Kansas variety there. But what did he get from each? So it seems like he got the maturity and the height from Everest. So it's kind of like a shorter, earlier maturing variety. It did get straw strength, I guess, from both. So it seems to have a pretty decent straw strength here in Wolverine. One card just to be aware of here is low soil pH. So unfortunately, Wolverine ended up getting the low soil pH from Wolf. And so that means that it is susceptible to acid soil. So if you have, so it is going to be more of a like a Western variety, Southwest type of variety, probably because of its maturity and good drought tolerance from Wolf there. So again, just keep in mind, if you have acid soils or low pH soils, we probably don't want to put Wolverine on them. But I'm looking forward to seeing what the yield record on this one is going to be in as we go from probably from Stafford County and Southwest there. Eric or Kelsey, any comments there on the disease package on Wolverine?
I think this one is a little new to us. Would you say, Eric? We haven't seen it as much in our K-State trials.
Yeah, it is fairly new. I think we've seen it in some of our stripe rust nurseries now, and it looks like it does have a fair degree of vulnerability to stripe rust. Some of these Wolf, Everest, and some of the Nebraska type of wheats there have been a little better on leaf rust, and Wolverine seems to be hanging in there pretty well on the leaf rust. Maybe what's interesting about Wolverine is I'm curious to see if it will maintain some of its resistance to leaf spotting diseases that we saw and SY Wolf. So I'm seeing a few brown leaves on some of the lower canopy there in this picture from Stafford County. So I'm kind of curious to try and get to some of these locations and try and get some notes myself to see how Wolverine holds up to diseases like tan spot in the future.
Okay, we have WD Grainfield now. Grainfield has been around for several years, and it's one of those that I like to say that has proven a very good performance and has been a very good yielding variety across the years. Just like we talked about SY Monument, Grainfield is another one that has a very wide adaptability. Although the name might bring you towards more northwest part of the state, it has yielded well really throughout the entire state with a pretty wide adaptability. Maturity-wise, Grainfield, it's going to be on that medium to medium late to head out whenever it's heading out, but it goes through the grain filling period actually quite quick. So maturity-wise, as far as harvest maturity goes, many times we're rating it as a medium to medium early. And so keep that in mind, a little bit on the later side to head, but it does finish quite fast. Very decent drought tolerance on Grainfield. As far as the acid soil goes, it's not going to be a double stop, right? So it doesn't have that excellent acid soil tolerance, but it handles soil's pH of perhaps down to 5.5 or even a little bit less than that very well. And so I don't think for most situations acid soils will be a concern here. Pretty good filtering ability. Again, is one that I still think is a consistent variety. Although, Kelsey, we might be needing to look into a fungicide application here more and more often.
Yeah, I think so. So, like you said, a great variety, but I think it's not so great across the board for most diseases. So it's a little more susceptible to most diseases when we look at the lineup here. So it's one of those varieties where to really get the bang for your buck out of planting it, you might need to really carefully consider if you need a fungicide or not to really maximize its performance.
Okay, as we look at some of these West bred varieties that have a numbering system to them now, keep in mind that the first number, the 4, is going to be your wheat type. So 4 tells you a hard bred winter wheat. The second number, 2, it tells you its maturity. So 2 is going to be an early maturing variety. 7 will be a later maturing variety. And the third number, not on this specific case, but starting last year, the third number tells you which year it was released, right? And then the last number is just a random number. 4269, it's a variety that is a medium early, as you can see by the numbering system there. It's a variety that's more adapted to central and eastern Kansas. It's a 2018 release out of West bred, excellent straw strength on 4269, and really a very strong yield record. If we look at K-State trials, the last 3 years in a row or last 2 years in a row, 4269 has done quite well. It's actually towards that. It was actually number 2 if we look 3 years in a row, 14 replicated trials. So very good yield record here on 4269. Keep in mind that it is a certified seed only here, so you might need to be looking into buying seed every year for this one. And Eric, if I'm not mistaken, this might be a good option following corn as well.
That's right. So 4269 does have some moderate levels of resistance to Fusarium head blight, maybe comparable to what we see in Zenda or Everest. So it's nice to have a little diversity in the toolbox here for controlling that problematic disease, particularly when planting wheat into corn residues. 4269 is maybe got some other weaknesses to keep in mind here, quite vulnerable to tan spot and to wheat streak mosaic. So if you're planting wheat into wheat in a no-till production system, or have a neighbor that likes to graze their volunteer wheat, this one could get hurt pretty bad in either of those situations.
Okay, our next variety here, 4303. I guess you can see there in the right-hand side of the picture, one of the things that that's very typical about this variety are those very long heads. It's not uncommon for these ones to put out 18 or 20 meshes in a head. Another thing that is quite clear from that photo is its straw strength, right? So you can see what's the thickness of those straws and really tells you that it has a pretty good standability there. So this variety here is one that has a very good yield potential. The yield record on the region has been pretty decent as well for South Central Kansas. Actually, if we would look 3 years in a row there, all those 14 trials, 4303 was actually coming up first. So that was a pretty decent yield record there, looking at 3 years in a row. Now, one thing that probably Kelsey can talk more to us here in a little bit is that you might need a fungicide to get there. But again, a very high yielding potential here. Keep in mind that the seed is very large here. So if you're planting in pounds per acre, this is another one that you might need to adjust your seeding rate to make sure that you have enough population out there. And this one, you really want to have that 1.2, 1.3 thousand seeds per acre there, because although it tillers quite well, it also slaughters many of those tillers before harvest as well. So we really want that population up there. Opposite from grain field here, this one, it heads early, but it takes a longer time to go through the grain filling period. So that's one other observation that we have had over the years. But again, it is an intensive management type of variety. And Kelsey, that includes application of fungicide, correct?
Yeah, I think so. Like a lot of these really high yield potential varieties, they kind of, the trade-off is that they are more susceptible to some diseases. And so this one, 303, it's pretty susceptible to stripe rust. So that would be a major concern, especially in these counties, and also blight, it's quite susceptible. So if you're planting this and you're going for high yield, I think you should consider, especially in these high disease years, a fungicide application to get the most out of this particular variety, 4303. Is that the last one in the deck?
I am not sure. I don't think so. But maybe we lost Amanda there.
I have 4 more left. Did it not move forward on me?
Okay, just move forward now.
Must have frozen up there.
Yep, very well. So 4515 here, another relatively new West bred variety. The main calling card on this one is really milling and baking quality. So if you're able to capitalize on those niche markets for milling and baking quality, that 4515, which was the last one, would actually be a good option. Now, the one that we have here on the photo now, 4699, this is one that can complement your maturity in the central and southeast part of the state. So West Breders is really putting this 4699 here as a later maturing option to go after corn, and then perhaps Erick can make a few comments there for us. The one concern that recently came up with 4699 here is on acid soils. Seems like in some of the K-State nurseries that we were evaluating low pH and how these varieties are responding to that low pH. 4699 was more on that borderline, was not really thriving very well on those acid soil conditions. So one thing to keep an eye on there. Erick, what about the remaining disease packages here on 4699?
Yeah, Romulo did mention that it might be an option following corn in a no-till production environment. We might be able to have some above average resistance to Fusarium head blight, again, comparable to what we're used to in Everest or Zendra. So again, another tool in the toolbox. It does look like it has a fair degree of susceptibility, moderate susceptible or fully susceptible to stripe rust, leaf rust. So I think that's something that we're going to need to keep an eye on. It may be one that if we're going to take advantage of some of that yield potential and Fusarium intermediate reaction to moderately resistant, it may need a fungicide yet to control those rust diseases.
Okay, and I guess we're coming up to our last one there, Amanda. I believe our last one is 4792. Yep. So this 4792, I've seen it a few times last year already and a few times this year again. So again, a newer one from West Pratt there. That 7 tells you it's more of a medium late maturing variety. The 9 tells you that it was released last year. So excellent struck strength on this one. I've seen it in some demonstration plots where everything else was probably leaning or lodging, and 4792 was standing up quite well. Very good standability on it, very good drought tolerance as well. Seems like it's, but keep in mind that this is more of a Western variety. Perhaps Kelsey, one of the things that might limit its adoption, Pratt and Stafford County, might be soil-borne mosaic virus. I don't think it has soil-borne mosaic virus resistance, and so it would really, it will not allow it to be adapted in the central part of the state for the most part. Is that correct?
It's definitely susceptible to soil-borne mosaic, which would make it difficult to grow in this part of the state. Also susceptible to Fusarium head blight, highly susceptible. So that's something to consider. We've been seeing a little bit less than others in some of our nurseries. So it does have some okay resistance to leaf rust and then decent resistance to stripe rust. But yeah, I think that soil-borne mosaic that can really bring the crop down and limit yield. And there's not much to do after the season starts. So something really to carefully consider for this variety.
Yeah, as we move west, I think I like this one, but really in central and south central we are here, I agree with you there. I think it's we have better varieties. So Amanda and Vicky, does that wrap up the varieties that we had for this plot? Would you guys like to make some final comments there?
That is all of the varieties that were in our plots this year. I'd like to thank all of our cooperators, and I'd like to thank Romulo, Erick, and Kelsey for giving us their takes on all these different varieties. And thank everybody for tuning in and watching this year's tours.